I'm Johnny Ashley in the Hood in the Woods, your neighborhood backwoods history and travel channel. You can find me on Facebook as The Real Hood in the Woods and on Instagram as Abandoned in Appalachia. Now, if you'd like to help me out and help yourself out too, you should get the official copy of the Hood in the Woods book, Volume 1 and Volume 2. The link will be in the description. Welcome to Matoaka. Today we are in Mercer County, West Virginia. I can't get over this town's name, so let's just talk about it really quick. We know the story of John Smith meeting Pocahontas in 1607 near Jamestown, the first British settlement in America. Pocahontas was her nickname. Her birth name was Matoka. Matoka's in the Pocahontas coal fields, and right down the street across the state line is a town called Pocahontas, Virginia. The actual person, Pocahontas, she was from the Powhatan tribe. The Powhatan's territory was along Virginia's coastal area, and she would have had nothing to do with this area. This was Shawnee territory. There's another town called Powhatan right down the street from here. In 1946, a Norfolk and Western train that traveled in between Norfolk, Virginia and Cincinnati, Ohio, called the Powhatan Express, derailed right outside the town of Powhatan. What are the odds, out of thousands of miles of track, that the train is going to derail in a town with the same name as the train? Legend is that train crash made a ghost Powhatan Express outside the town of Powhatan. But I'm here to talk about ghost towns, not ghost trains. This land's been settled since 1793. In the 1890s, where the right branch and the left branch of the Widemouth Creek meet, there was a school, a post office, and a church. Most of the population was subsistence farmers. The residents didn't know it yet, but in 1884 times began to change when Norfolk and Western opened up the new river line. The line was built to bring coal from deeper in the mountains. In Matoaka, it just sat a few miles from the main line. Soon a new line was being built along Bluestone River, which Widemouth Creek flows into. The law in West Virginia was that railroad companies couldn't mine coal because it created a monopoly. To get around this, Norfolk and Western bought vast tracts of land or the mineral rights to it. Then they built train tracks to where the coal was. They would then lease the land to actual mining companies. Not only did they get paid royalties for the coal mined off their land, but they also got to charge transportation fees. 1901, a subsidy of Norfolk and Western called the Pocahontas Fuel Company, which was not a coal company but a real estate company, bought the mineral rights to the land that would become the town of Matoaka. The railroad was headquartered on Virginia's east coast, in Powhatan territory, and they're the ones that gave everything these Pocahontas names. In 1903, the Matoaka Land Improvement Company was founded by investors in Montgomery County and Giles County, Virginia. The Matoaka Land and Improvement Company bought tracts of land from two families. They then deeded them over to the railroad so they could build a branch line to the town. In 1904, the railroad reached Matoaka to service the Poama Coal Company. On the right fork of the river was the Algonquin Coal and Coke Company. It was in a town called Lamar. The town and the mine was established in 1915. Two mine shafts were dug in the town, which also had a theater, bowling alley, and a clubhouse. The town was originally called Algonquin, but in 1930 the Lamar Colliery took over and they changed the name to Lamar. In 1918, the mine employed over 100 people. The mine closed in 1953, and all that's left of the original buildings is the foundations. On the left fork was the town of Arista, and it was operated by the Wyandotte Coal Company. On March 2, 1923, an explosion rocked the Arista mine. 75 men were working 3,200 feet from the mine's entrance. The mine superintendent originally blamed the blast on someone using too much dynamite, but later it was suspected that coal dust in the air ignited. 37 of the miners were a good distance away from the blast, and they escaped unharmed. The other 38, they were trapped. By nightfall, 27 of the 38 miners had been rescued. 6 bodies had been recovered, and there was 5 more people trapped in the mine. Explosions burn oxygen. In the mine with no fresh air, the leftover carbon dioxide from the explosion is a silent killer. It's called afterdamp, and the rescuers assumed that the 5 trapped miners had suffocated. The rescuers reached the miners the next day. Their bodies lay in a huddle near the cave-in, as if they had sat together to await their fate. 15 hours after the blast, the rescuers broke through the cave-in. They carried out 4 bodies and a nearly dead Lloyd Liscombe. 10 people had died in the blast, but not Lloyd. Doctors were impressed by his speedy recovery. Brington's also on the left fork. It was run by Solvay Collieries from 1915 to 1922. 1923, the Kingston Pocahontas Coal Company took over, and they ran the mine in town until 1942. Hiawatha is also on the left fork of the river. The Enos Coal Company and the Smokeless Coal and Coke Company operated here. Since the trains from all these communities had to pass through Matoaka to get to the main line, the town quickly became the local commercial center. The success was short-lived. In 1907, back when all the buildings were made of wood and all the light came from an open flame, Matoaka's commercial district burnt down. Before the smoke even cleared, they were building the town again, but this time out of brick. The town grew. In 1907, the Matoaka Milling and Grocery Store opened, and in 1911, the Matoaka Opera House opened. Also in 1911, the Matoaka Power Company finished building their power plant. A school was built, and Lewis Hubbard and Company opened a grocery store. The town incorporated in 1912, and in 1913 the Matoaka Water Works was established. The Matoka Building and Loan Association was working overtime, lending money to entrepreneurs to begin a business in the town. Lumber became another big local industry, and in 1907 the Virginia Railroad came to town. Now the town had two depots, one for Virginia and one for Norfolk and Western. By the end of the 1920s, the town had 3 hotels, a newspaper, a jewelry store, a drugstore, and a handful of general merchandise and grocery stores. In the early 1920s, Barger Wyatt established the Matoka Recorder, a local newspaper. Barger Street's the main street going through downtown, and it's named after one of the town's founders, Captain David Barger. He was never a sailor or in the military. He's called Captain because he was conductor in charge of all the Norfolk and Western trains in Mercer County. Captain was an honorary name for a train conductor. Legend is, he drove the first passenger train down the New River Line in Mercer County. Being born a few counties away in Montgomery County, Virginia, Captain Barger was a lot more local than the railroad executives and coal barons that he rubbed shoulders with. He was one of the original investors from Montgomery County. Captain Barger was a descendant of one of the earliest settlers of Montgomery County, Caspar Barger. He was one of the settlers killed at the Draper Meadow Massacre. In 1755, a group of Shawnee, not Powhatans, attacked a group of settlers, killing 4 of them. They also kidnapped a girl named Mary Draper Ingalls. They took her back to Ohio with them. Eventually she escaped, and she walked the 400 miles back home. A book was written about this called Follow the River. This is the grave of David Barger. He was an American in every sense of the word. 102 years later, when David Barger was born in 1857, his family wasn't the wealthy landowning family they once had been. I mean, some Bargers were, but his were not. David Barger was 3½ when the Civil War started, and he was 6½ when he watched Northern troops burn down half the county. He worked on his family's farm, and he walked miles to go to school in a 1-room log cabin. He came to age during the Reconstruction era. At 17, he got a job as a freight agent at the New River stop, right across the river from Radford. If you wanted to work for the railroad, Radford was the place to be. It had been a small community before the Tennessee and Virginia Railroad reached it. During the Civil War, when the North came and burned down the community, it was because they'd been following the railroad. Originally, the town was called Central Depot. By the time Barger got there, they had changed the name to Mount Pleasant. The town didn't become Radford until 1891 and was named after a railroad executive. That executive, John Radford, had a branch line going to the salt mines in Saltsville. Ironically, that was David Barger's next stop in his career. In a 1891 Roanoke Times article, they said about him, quote, "He is a great organizer, and the company soon took him out of the depot, and he has organized every piece of work undertaken by the company since." Captain Barger became the conductor in charge of all the Norfolk and Western trains in Mercer County. When he had that job, that's when he began focusing on Matoaka. In 1905, Captain Barger retired from the railroad and turned his full attention to coal mining. When he left, he was a division superintendent. In 1908, he founded the Bank of Matoaka. This is Walnut Grove in Montgomery County, Virginia. David Barger bought this property in 1890 and built this house in 1910 on the site of an earlier house. He operated a livestock and a dairy farm, and he had multiple other buildings to house these ventures. Down the street from the farm is the mill, and it was also built in 1910. The mill was used to make graham flour, an ingredient for an early health food called graham crackers. Later, it was used to make animal feed. The 4-story mill also had a 30-foot wheel. The mill was so swanky that a picture of it was used in 1928 for the Fitzwater Wheel Company, the company that made this water wheel. The operations here stopped in the 1950s. By 2007, the mill's isolated location made it a favorite spot for teenagers to come hang out, drink, and do the hibbity-dibbity. That year, the mill accidentally burned down, and the giant blaze brought firefighters from all over the county. The small creek that turned the 30-foot wheel didn't have enough water for the fire crews to pump to put out the fire, and they had to refill their trucks at a car wash a couple miles down the road. This is David Barger's house in Bluefield, West Virginia. It was built in 1916 by Alex Mahood. He was a local architect, and he built half of Bluefield and is well represented in the historic registry. In 1931, at the age of 73, Captain Barger was called upon to conduct the big train in the sky. He left his wife the house and his daughter the mill. He's buried in a cemetery a few miles away. In his will, he also donated $300,000 for the cemetery's upkeep. In 1920, the first census the town was in, they had 647 residents. The population peaked in 1950 with 1,003. The town continued booming until the end of World War II. By the mid-50s, most of the mines around Matoka had closed. In 1959, the Virginia Railroad merged with Norfolk and Western. In In 1958, the Bank of Matoaka closed, and they moved to Princeton, the county seat. School desegregation was another thing going on in the 1950s. In a speech, Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall said that West Virginia had made more progress in integrating their school system than any other state in the country. The Charleston Gazette ran a headline saying that Dixie can look to West Virginia for lessons in how to integrate. By the beginning of the 1956 school year, Mercer County was one of the 3 out of 55 counties in West Virginia that hadn't integrated their school system yet. On September 6, 1956, Mercer County schools integrated. Out of the 17,000 students in the county, 2,000 of them were black. That day, 89 black kids began attending 14 schools. 12 of those schools had no problems. At Princeton High School, there was picket lines. And on Monday night, a cross was burned at the school. Come Tuesday morning, another cross was burned there. Matoka was the other school that had problems. As 28 black kids walked into the school for the first time, a crowd formed and began throwing eggs at them. Bob Horman, a TV reporter from Huntington, came down here to cover this, and he and his camera crew were also pelted by eggs. Reverend Spurlock, a Methodist minister, he confronted the crowd and calmed them down. A local businessman called a meeting, and the parents decided to boycott the school. The next day, the crowd of students had grown to 200. The school enrollment was 602 kids, but by Thursday, only 131 showed up. 14 of them were black. By October, the protests at the school had calmed down, but the next year, problems started again. In October 1957, a white student and a black student got into it on the school bus. At lunch, 150 white students refused to return to class. 2 windows were broken as the students gathered across the street from the school. Protests like this were going on at a school in a neighboring county too. They were pre-planned. The county superintendent called the state police and they cleared the crowd out. While that was going on, 2 kids were removed from the school by their parents and 3 kids who was outside the school got marched back inside by their parents. 670 students were enrolled here. 10 of them were black. Out of those 10, 6 of those black students were sent home by the principal for leaning out the windows and taunting the students that gathered across the street. It was 4 girls and 2 boys. Earlier that day when they arrived to school, a mob had formed around the school bus and pummeled the 2 boys. The principal didn't kick them out the front door to the angry mob. He let them out the back door to a waiting taxi cab, and they left without anyone ever seeing. The next day when the school buses came, there was 4 state cops, 2 sheriff's deputies, and local cops waiting for them. They kept the kids moving inside the school, not giving them a chance to congregate and cause trouble. Only 4 black students came to school that next day. They rode their own bus, and the state police escorted them inside the building. The principal had about enough of this, and every student that was missing school to protest was suspended until they could come back in with a parent and speak to him. By the end of the day, which must have been a very long one, 100 students had returned to the school with their parents and been readmitted. As time passed and Cole stopped being king, hard times hit this little town. It was a beautiful August morning in 2014, and the annual per capita income in this little town was less than $10,000 when Brandon Combs slipped into an old hotel on Barger Street to participate in the time-honored Appalachian tradition of stripping copper wire out of old buildings and coal mines. At some point during this little adventure, he decided to sit down, relax, and enjoy him a smoke break. When he was done, he flipped the button a hole in the building and forgot about it until it started smoking. He tried to put it out, but it didn't work. It was time for an escape. But there was people out there. Knowing he couldn't flee the burning building in front of witnesses, he was forced to wait inside. When the coast was clear, he grabbed his trusty wire cutters and he made a break for it. The building was an old hotel that the mayor owned, and he was renovating it to turn it into apartments. By 11 a.m., the fire had spread to 5 buildings, all of them owned by the mayor. The mayor and his dad before him had poured money, blood, and sweat into fixing up this town. But now with the fire, it was time for the tears. In total, 9 fire departments came to fight the fire. The building next to the hotel was an occupied apartment building. As the police cleared the building, they walked in on 2 guys smoking a doob. Not being ones to pass up probable cause, the police searched, and they arrested the guys for possession with intent to deliver marijuana. Another resident of the building returned home to find her house burning. She told Chief Summers that her cat was still inside. The police chief himself busted into the burning building and saved her cat from having to cash in one of its 9 lives. No one was hurt in the fire, but it caused $4 million in damages. By 6 p.m., Brandon Combs was charged with arson and entering without breaking. He had thought he made a smooth getaway, but the security camera across the street saw everything. There he was, clear as day, covered in soot, running out the burning building with a pair of wire cutters clutched in his hand. The prosecutor dropped the arson charges, Brandon took the deal, and he was sent to rehab. In 2014, after the fire, the mayor fired Chief Summers. The mayor said it was because Summers hadn't finished mandatory training with the state police. The chief said it was because he was investigating the mayor's cleanup of the burn site, which wasn't up to code. The chief filed a civil suit over this. He tried to get the mayor and the city council dismissed, but that's what ended up happening to his lawsuit. In 2018, the town's residents voted to end incorporation and join the county. The town hadn't made enough money in taxes to cover their payroll, and the water company wasn't making enough money to continue operating. That's my video. Hope you liked it. If you did like it, you need to hit the like button and hit the subscribe button. Don't be watching my stuff for free. If you like this movie, here's some other videos you might like.